大家好，我係 Jack。美國5月份整體消費物價指數 CPI 比去年同期勁升 8.6%。CPI 嘅數據再創40年嘅新高，上一次有8% 以上嘅通脹呢，已經係1973至到1982年。當時70年代嘅高通脹令到美國喺12年裏面總共出現咗4次嘅經濟衰退。最恐怖嘅地方係當其時嘅情況同而家有啲類似嘅。當其時1970年年尾咧步出咗衰退，咁你見到通脹率回落，咁結果咧1973年嘅年尾通脹又開始回升，結果咧事隔3年之後又再出現衰退。當其時出現第二次衰退，同而家嘅通脹率係一樣，啱啱超過8%。如果根據聯儲局官方嘅定義，我哋喺2020年4月之後就步出咗疫情嘅衰退，咁去到而家就係剛剛2年零2個月。如果因為高通脹而引致衰退，對投資者最恐怖嘅地方係咩呢？你係冇辦法選擇躺平，就算咧你唔投資都好，你每年有8% 以上嘅通脹率，就好似1972年至到1982年咁樣，你經過咗10年咧，當初嘅100蚊到10年之後咧得返43蚊嘅購買力。點解會揀巴菲特嚟取經呢？大家可以聽下03年巴菲特喺巴郡嘅股東會當其時對通脹嘅預期，佢講咗啲乜嘢？
Now, if you talk about the value of the dollar declining dramatically, we all face that risk if we have a lot of dollar assets. I personally don't worry about the American currency getting worth far less relative to other currencies as much as I worry. I don't really worry about it, but I think there's a probability that sometime in the next 20 or 30 years that you could have rampant inflation in this country again. You'll probably have it around the world, and it's probably more likely in a good many other countries than it is in the United States. But inflation is always a latent danger to an economy. I mean, I always think of inflation as being in remission at all times because it's something that has a cause that will recur in terms of human behavior from time to time, I think, in terms of how legislatures behave and governments behave. So I think that the probability of high inflation at some point during the next, say, 20 or 30 years it's not a low probability. I hope it doesn't happen. Charlie?
Well, in the long term, practically all currencies go to hell. In other words, it's a product of like the Roman, what was it, denarius or something. You take the British pound, you take the American dollar so far. And if you want to go out 200 years, will some politicians in the United States ruin the currency? I think the answer is yes. But I wouldn't anticipate some horrible event in the near future. But if things really went to hell, Argentina started confiscating property of shareholders. And if that starts happening and the government is doing it, we probably won't be able to protect you.
That sounds like kind of a nervous laugh to me.
聽完咧，係咪覺得有啲毛管動？03年已經講緊咧，嚟緊20-30年，好大機會又嚟多一次好高嘅通脹。如果大家有留意個頻道咧，我成日都話，其實 Smart Money 咧會比我哋甚至乎經濟數據咧更早知道通脹嘅嚟臨。我哋聽下2021年巴菲特講過啲咩。
From raw material purchases by Berkshire subsidiaries, are you seeing signs of inflation beginning to increase?
We're seeing very substantial inflation. It's very interesting. I mean, we're raising prices. People are raising prices to us. It's being accepted. I mean, it's not, if we get, well, take home building. I mean, the cost of, we've got 9 home builders and, in addition to our manufactured housing thing and operation, which is the largest in the country. So we really do a lot of housing. The costs are just up. Steel costs, just every day. they're going up, and there hasn't yet been, because the wage stuff follows. I mean, if the UAW writes a 3-year contract, we got a 3-year contract. But if you're buying steel at General Motors or someplace, you're paying more every day. So it's an economy really. It's red hot. I mean, and we weren't expecting it. I mean, all our companies, when they thought when they were allowed to go back to work, you know, at or various operations, we closed the furniture stores. I mentioned, you know, they were closed for 6 weeks or so on average, and they didn't know what was going to happen when they opened. And you know, they can't stop people from buying things, and we can't deliver them. And they say, well, that's okay, because nobody else can deliver them either, and we'll wait for 3 months or something of the sort. But the backlog grows, and then we thought it would end when the $600 payments ended, and I think, you know, around August of last year. It just kept going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going. And I get the figures every week. I call, or Bumpkin calls me, and we go over day by day what happened at 3 different stores in Chicago and Kansas City and Dallas, and it just won't stop. People have money in their pocket, and they pay the higher prices, and when carpet prices go up in a month or two, you know, we announced a price increase for April. For our costs are going up. Supply chains all screwed up, you know, for all kinds of people. But it's almost a buying frenzy, except certain areas you can't buy yet. You know, you really can't buy international air travel, and so the money is being diverted from a piece of the economy into the rest, and everybody's got more cash in their pocket than, except for. Meanwhile, you know, it's a terrible situation for a percentage of the people. You know, this suit, I haven't worn a suit, you know, for a year practically, and that means that the dry cleaner nearest just went out of business. I mean, nobody's bringing in suits to get dry cleaned, and nobody's bringing in white shirts to get the place where my wife goes. The small business person, if you didn't have takeout and delivery services for restaurants, you got killed. On the other hand, if you've got takeout facilities, you've done, you know, same source sales of Dairy Queen are up a whole lot, and they adapted. But it is not a price sensitive economy right now in the least, and I don't know exactly how one shows up in different price indices, but there's more inflation going on than quite a bit more inflation going on than people would have anticipated just 6 months ago or thereabouts.
Yeah, and there's one very intelligent man who thinks it's dangerous. And that's just the start.
我諗聽到呢一度咧，大家都明白點解咧巴菲特會買入 OXY 同埋 Chevron 呢兩隻油股。咁面對高通脹，有邊一啲嘅股票表現會比較好，同埋有邊一啲嘅股票係應該避開咧？咁我哋可以聽下2011同埋2015巴菲特喺股東會講咗啲乜嘢。喺開始之前咧，大家記得 comment、like 同埋 share 呢條片，同埋唔好唔記得咧 follow 埋我哋 Facebook channel 同埋 YouTube channel， 同埋咧記得撳着埋個鐘仔，咁下次有新片就會通知你。
This question comes from Mark Jordan in Charleston, South Carolina. He writes, in a period of high inflation, which particular businesses owned by Berkshire Hathaway will perform the best, and which will perform the worst, and why?
Well, the businesses that will perform the best are the ones that require little capital investment to facilitate inflationary growth, and that have strong positions that allow them to increase prices with inflation. And you know, we have a candy business, for example, and the value of the dollar since we bought that candy business has probably fallen at least 85%, I would say, 80 to 85%. And that candy business sells 75% more pounds of candy than it did when we bought it, but it has 10 times the revenues, and it doesn't take a lot more capital. So that kind of a business, any business that has enough freedom to price to offset inflation and doesn't require commensurate investment or huge investment to support it will do well. Businesses like our utilities, which get, in effect, a bond-like return, but require, if you're going to build a generating plant, it costs twice as much per kilowatt hour of capacity, and all you're going to get is a fixed return, and yields on bonds go up, perhaps dramatically if you get high inflation, is not going to do that well in an inflationary period, just because it has certain aspects of a bond-like investment, and bonds generally are not going to do well in inflation. Charlie?
Well, but like our insurance operations, our capital-intensive railroad business is certainly one of the best railroads in the world, and our utility operations are certainly one of the best utility operations in the world. And so it isn't all bad to be up there world class in your main businesses.
Our railroad, the government's talked about building a high-speed rail system in California. I think they're talking about 800 miles of track. And their estimated cost was about $43 billion. And estimated costs on constructions of things like that go up dramatically, much more often than they get reduced, even by a minor amount. And of course, we paid $43 billion, counting debt assumed, for a rail system which has 22,000 miles of main track and 6,000 plus locomotives and 13,000 bridges if you ever want to buy a bridge. So that the replacement value of that asset during inflationary already is huge, and it would grow dramatically. And the world, our country, will always need rail transportation. So it is a terrific asset to own. I'll just leave it at that.
Which of Berkshire's businesses are best suited to thrive during a period of high inflation, and why? Which will suffer the most, and why?
Yeah, well, the best businesses during inflation are usually the best. They're the businesses that you buy once, and then you don't have to keep making capital investments subsequently. So you do not face the problem of continuous reinvestment involving greater and greater dollars because of inflation. That's one reason real estate in general is good during inflation. If you built your own house 55 years ago like Charlie did, or bought one 55 years ago like I did, it's a one-time outlay. Whereas if you get an inflationary expansion in replacement capital without having to replace yourself. And if you got something that's useful to someone else, it tends to be priced in terms of replacement value over time. So you really get the inflationary kick. Now, if you're in a business such as the utility business or the railroad business, it just keeps eating up more and more money, and your depreciation charges are inadequate, and you're kidding yourself as to your real economic profits. So any business with heavy capital investment tends to be a poor business to be in inflation, and often it's a poor business to be in generally. And the business where you buy something once, a brand is a wonderful thing to own during inflation. See's Candy built their brand many years ago. Now, we've had to nourish it as we've gone along, but the value of that brand increases during inflation, just as the value of really any strongly branded goods.
聽到呢度，大家應該覺得好有希望，但係喺度提翻大家，當其時喺高通脹底下，喺1973同埋1974年 S&P 咧分別跌咗 17.37% 同埋 29.72%。如果你冇避開呢兩年， 名義上唔計通脹，都足足要7年半先至返到家鄉。如果計埋通脹蠶食嘅影響 ，S&P 500足足咧要22年多啲先至返得到家鄉。唔知頭先巴菲特提到嗰幾類型公司，大家對邊一類型比較有興趣呢？歡迎大家喺留言區話俾我哋知，咁我哋咧可以就住比較多人中意嗰一類型，可以特別做一集。下次見，拜拜。本頻道所分享一切資料只作參考用途，並不旨在構成任何買賣證券、貨幣投資服務之建議、銷售或招攬，並未顧任何個別用戶的投資目的、財政狀況或收入。同時所涉及的資料不應被視為一項建議，或於任何司法管轄區的購買或出售的邀約或邀約意圖，或購買或出售任何證券、金融產品或工具邀約的招攬，或參與交易策略而該等交易策略邀約意圖及招攬是非法的。本頻道不會對所提供任何資料或分析的準確性或完整性作出承諾。證券價格可使我哋實現變成毫無價值，買賣證券未必一定能賺取利潤，反而可能會招致損失。無論如何，投資者都應審慎投資行事。